back, everyone. This is Modern with Randy. I am Randy, and today we're talking about one of the more interesting decks you'll see played here. This is called Twiddle Storm, Twiddle Wing. Goes by a couple different names. Overall, though, the deck is kind of an interesting blend on the One Ring, essentially. So, what this deck is trying to do, essentially, is get Lotus Field into play with or without Desert Temple. Desert Temple was a card that got reprinted into Modern, or got printed into Modern, I should say, with Modern Horizons 3. And so what you're doing here is you're trying to make a bunch of mana with Lotus Field tapping for 3 mana, Deserted Temple that can pay 1, tap, and untap the land, so you can tap Lotus Field, make more mana. You have Vizier, which you can cycle it to untap target permanent. We have Dream's Grip, so you can untap target or tap target permanent, or untap target permanent. And we have Hidden Strings, which lets you untap or untap target permanent, then tap or untap another target permanent. And then we also have the namesake of the deck, Twiddle. So we get to untap our land a bunch and make a bunch of mana. And what we're trying to do here with this is make a bunch of mana, cast the One Ring, tap the One Ring for a bunch of times until we get a Wish, and then wish for a bunch of different cards, honestly. But the main one being you're hoping to wish for a Tome Scour to mill 5 cards, and ideally play an Underworld Breach. Keep doing that until you can rebuy a Wish and get Thassa's Oracle, and then go through your entire deck. That is one way of doing it. And how we're going to do that is kind of convoluted and weird, but let's go through the ways, shall we? So we have Consider Preordain to help smooth out our draws, all of our tapping, untapping BS. Essentially, we have Expedition Map, which lets us go find our Lotus Field or find our temple. We have Underworld Breach, which lets us go through and recast Wish, recast all our tap untap spells. We have Sink into the Super as a land, as well as a bounce spell to get rid of problematic permanents, things like that. We have Wish. Co-sign to Memory looks a little weird in here, but we can counter the ability on Lotus Fields. So we don't have to sacrifice 2 other lands to make it, make it really easy to go off, essentially. And then we have the One Ring. So a couple different ways you can do this. We can draw out our entire deck with the One Ring by tapping, untapping a bunch of times in the same turn. So you can draw through your entire deck and not have to worry about doing the Underworld Breach Wish combo. You can do that. Alternatively, you can Underworld Breach Wish for the Thassa's Oracle like we saw. Go through that whole combo with the Tome Scour, things like that. Different ways to do this whole thing. But the deck is very consistent at what it wants to do. It's very well-fitting, and it has a bunch of answers to pretty much anything it wants to do. So even if the land base, we're playing full Scalding Tarns, 1 Thundering Falls, Tolaria West, which notably the Transmute lets us go get our Lotus Field, and there's 3 basic islands. So nothing too fancy with the mana base or anything like that. And then just a bunch of ways to tap, untap. It is essentially a combo deck that you're looking at here. It's very one-track minded, but also not. So it has a bunch of different things you can do. So like, let's say that you're able to do a bunch of stuff, but you're not going to be able to get to a point where you've drawn a bunch of cards with the ring, but you never found an Underworld Breach or anything like that. You can wish for a Predator Ooze as well. So this has a Storm ability, so it's a 3 green 2 generic for a 2/2 Ooze, which sounds horrendous, right? But it has an ability that the Ooze isn't legendary if it's a token, and then it enters the battlefield +1/+1 counter on it for each other Ooze you control. That's another win con we have, essentially. Being able to go through and just if we're not able to combo off for whatever reason, we can do this. Just make 5, 6 of these copies of these, and they're all going to be bigger than the next one, essentially, as they come in. We have Dismember for problematic creatures. We have Brotherhood's End for decks are going wide, things like that, and additional Underworld Breach in case we need to grab it with the Wish. We have 2 Echoing Truce for what we're going to bring in against our opponents for problematic things, and then same thing with the Defabricate which is a 1 blue, 1 generic instant. So you can either counter target artifact or enchantment spell. And if it's countered this way, exile instead of putting it into the owner's graveyard. Or you can counter target activated or triggered ability. Notably, this does help with our Lotus Fields too, so we can counter that if it's just like kind of sitting in our hand doing nothing. We also have a Pack Negation and a Swan Song in our sideboard here, just as good removal or good counter magic. We have another Consign to Memory in case we need a wish for that for whatever reason. Just, all these different spells that we have essentially to make our thing work. But, these are your 4 main wish targets, is either getting Underworld Breach so you can go off, getting the Tome Scour so you can go off, and then eventually getting the Thassa's Oracle just to win the game on the spot, or the Predator Ooze just in case for some reason you can't go off, you can't draw that many cards, whatever the case may be, we have that as well. So it's an interesting little deck. This deck does seem to keep popping up and doing well. It's one of those weird things where I know I've lost this deck before because it just kind of does some stuff that you're not prepared for. Now I know what you guys are thinking. You're like, hey, I play Jeskai Control. This deck seems like I'm just going to steamroll it because all I'm going to do is I'm going to go cast a spell, I'm going to counter it, nothing happens. And that seems like what would happen, right? It seems like, I'm playing control deck, I'm just going to win. Until you realize that you don't put enough pressure on anybody as a control deck, where you can they sit there and pile up and wait, and then they'll have like 2 Lotus Fields in play, and they're just gonna go, all right, I'm gonna cast these 12 spells. You need to counter 4 of them. Do you have enough mana to counter 4 spells? You don't. You say, okay, cool, I'm gonna win, and they'll just go off and do it. It's kind of crazy, kind of watching this deck go off and do what it does. It's very interesting. It's kind of one of the reasons why I want to point it out. I'm always trying to bring new decks or interesting decks that you might not have been paying attention to, you might not have saw. But this deck has slowly been putting up a lot of numbers. It hasn't been doing hasn't been getting first, but it's been top 8ing a bunch of challenges, top 16ing a bunch of challenges. It's like 1 or 2 copies in there. So it's not doing anything crazy, it's not dominating the meta, it's not doing anything wild. But it is interesting that this deck has started popping up kind of and seemingly out of nowhere, which is kind of crazy to think about. And it's just one of those interesting decks, one of those fun decks. It's a relatively cheap deck if you don't consider the One Ring, if you already own the One Ring. If you don't own the One Ring, it's really expensive. But it is one of those fun and interesting decks, and it's one of those cool little combo decks that you just don't see all that often, right? Everyone, if you see the Wish in the list, it's usually because it's Storm going off or doing something interesting. So this is also a Stormish style deck, technically a Storm deck because it has a Storm card in the sideboard. But it's one of those interesting decks that just kind of has kind of popped up out of nowhere and is just doing its own little thing and getting there all on its own. And it's very interesting to see. It's very consistent. It's a deck that I've started to pick up and play because it's just fun. It's a fun deck to play. You kind of get to win out of nowhere, and people aren't really prepared for it because this deck hasn't been put up a lot of numbers. So it is something to take a look at. Maybe something to take to your next RCQ if you're already have the rings or you're already looking to buy the rings, things like that. Just a fun deck overall, and just thought I'd kind of highlight it here. That's what I like to do on my channel. I like to highlight decks that people don't normally see, and new things that you can take to your next RCQ as well. And this is definitely one of those, if you're trying to surprise people, especially in this open meta where people are going to be expecting to play against energy decks and things like that. Just basically having no creatures in your deck and being able to win through ring protection and everything else seems like a great way to take down the next RCQ. As always, guys, I am Randy. This is Modern with Randy, and I will catch you guys next time.